My name is Eliyahu, and I was once a respected rabbi in Jerusalem. My life was a carefully measured routine, a cycle of prayer, study, and service to my community. Each day began with the morning prayers, the words of the Torah anchoring my world. My family, devout and steeped in generations of tradition, was my greatest pride. My beliefs were unshakable, or so I thought. I lived by the law, unwavering in my conviction that salvation was found through its perfect adherence. But beneath the surface, doubts occasionally gnawed at my mind. The scriptures spoke of a Messiah, a promised one who would bring redemption. Yet, the more I studied, the more questions arose. Was our Messiah yet to come, or had we overlooked him? These thoughts I buried deep, unwilling to let them disturb my carefully constructed reality. It wasn't until I faced death itself that the truth shattered my world and forced me to confront everything I had ever believed. Before we dive into this journey, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're from. Your support helps us share more transformative stories like this one. I was conducting Shabbat service, delivering a lesson on the importance of obedience to the Torah, when my chest tightened and the room blurred. My heart raced as darkness consumed me. I heard panicked voices, but they grew distant. Then silence. I opened my eyes, not to the familiar sights of the synagogue, but to an expanse of light, blinding, pure, and overwhelming. It wasn't just light, it was a presence. A voice, gentle yet commanding, pierced through the brilliance. "Eliyahu, do you know me?" I was terrified. Who was this speaking? A flood of memories and scripture passages rushed through my mind, and I stammered, "I am a servant of the Almighty." The voice replied, "You speak of him, but you do not know him." Suddenly, I was taken on a journey. I saw my life replayed, every word I had spoken, every act of devotion, but also every moment of doubt and pride. I had led others to focus on rituals, but I had neglected the heart of God's message. Then I saw him, a figure radiant and unmistakably the center of everything. His eyes were filled with indescribable love and sorrow. "I am the Messiah," he said. I recoiled. "No, the Messiah is yet to come." But he showed me the scars in his hands and feet. He showed me the cross. In that moment, I knew. I had spent my life searching for a truth that had already come, yet I had rejected it. When I awoke, gasping for air, the paramedics told me I had been clinically dead for several minutes. But I had seen the truth, and nothing in my life would ever be the same. As I lay in the hospital, the vision consumed my thoughts. How could this be? The Messiah was not supposed to die on a cross. It contradicted everything I had been taught. Yet I couldn't deny what I had seen. I began studying scripture with new eyes, revisiting passages I had glossed over before. Isaiah 53 leapt out at me with undeniable clarity. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He was pierced for our transgressions. How had I missed it? This suffering servant wasn't the triumphant warrior Messiah I had envisioned. He was the one who bore the weight of humanity's sins. My family noticed the change in me. My wife, Rivka, asked why I was so distant. I couldn't bring myself to tell her yet. I feared the repercussions. What would the community say? What would my peers think? During my first synagogue service after the experience, my hands trembled as I held the Torah. The words felt different now. They pointed not just to the law, but to the Messiah who had fulfilled it. I began asking subtle questions during study sessions, probing my students and colleagues about passages like Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. Some responded with curiosity, others with hostility. One evening, a colleague pulled me aside and warned me, "Eliyahu, these questions are dangerous. Don't stray from the path." But I couldn't stop. My heart was burning with a truth too powerful to ignore. The turning point came when I met a man named Jonathan, a quiet member of the synagogue I had scarcely noticed before. He approached me after a service, saying he had overheard some of my recent questions. "Rabbi," he began cautiously, "I think you're searching for something more. Can I share something with you?" At first I was defensive, but his sincerity disarmed me. Over tea, Jonathan shared his testimony. He had been raised in the same traditions, but had encountered Yeshua, Jesus, and had found him to be the promised Messiah. I listened, skeptical but intrigued. He showed me connections in Scripture that I had never considered. Micah's prophecy of the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, the timeline in Daniel pointing to the arrival of the Anointed One. For the first time, I saw how the pieces fit together. But admitting this truth would mean losing everything: my position, my reputation, perhaps even my family. The realization of Yeshua as the Messiah weighed heavily on me. My heart was alive with a newfound sense of truth, but the implications terrified me. My wife, Rivka, noticed my growing distance. One night, as we prepared for bed, she confronted me. "Eliyahu," she said softly, "you've been different since the hospital. What's happening?" I hesitated. She was my closest companion, yet how could I tell her something that would shake the foundation of our shared faith? Finally, I whispered, "Rivka, I believe I've found the Messiah." Her face paled, and for a moment she said nothing. Then came the questions, sharp and unrelenting. "The Messiah? What are you saying? You've always said he hasn't come yet. Who has filled your mind with this nonsense?" I tried to explain the vision, the scriptures, and how they pointed to Yeshua. Her response was immediate and cutting. "Do you realize what you're saying? You're betraying everything we've ever believed." Over the next few weeks, Rivka's anger turned to fear. She avoided discussing the subject but grew distant, throwing herself into household duties and community events. My children, young but perceptive, began to notice the tension. "Is Ima mad at you, Abba?" my youngest daughter asked one evening. The synagogue was no refuge either. My subtle questions about the scriptures hadn't gone unnoticed. An elder summoned me for a private meeting, his tone stern and accusatory. "Eliyahu, your recent teachings have caused concern. Are you straying from the path of our fathers?" I lied, insisting I was merely exploring different interpretations. But the encounter left me shaken. I realized the walls were closing in. Jonathan became my only source of comfort. We met in secret, poring over the New Testament he had given me. It felt both foreign and familiar, as if it completed a story I had only partially understood. Still, the weight of isolation grew heavier. My world, family, faith, and community was unraveling. The conflict at home and within the community escalated rapidly, introducing challenges I had never anticipated. One morning, Rivka handed me a letter as I sat at the breakfast table. Her hands trembled, and her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. "It's from the synagogue council," she said curtly. I opened the letter and scanned the contents. It was a summons, a formal inquiry into my recent teachings and questions. I looked up at Rivka, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. "Did you tell them?" I asked, my voice strained. Her silence was answer enough. "You've left me no choice," she finally said. "They need to help you before you lose everything." The words stung. I wanted to tell her I wasn't lost but found, yet it was clear she couldn't see it that way. The synagogue meeting was a formal affair, with stern-faced elders seated in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on me as I entered. They questioned me for hours, probing every recent sermon, every scripture I had referenced. Their accusations were veiled but sharp. "Your interpretations are troubling, Eliyahu," one elder said. "They deviate from the teachings of our fathers. Are you being influenced by outside ideas?" "No," I said, careful with my words. "I am simply seeking to understand the scriptures more deeply." They weren't satisfied. Another elder leaned forward, his voice colder. "Be careful, Rabbi. The path of heresy is a slippery one." When I returned home, I found Rivka waiting for me. "What did they say?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope that I had renounced my new beliefs. "They warned me to stay in line," I replied. "And will you?" The question hung in the air. I couldn't answer it without betraying the truth burning inside me. Instead, I turned away, unable to meet her eyes. The tension seeped into every corner of our lives. My children began noticing the change in our home. My eldest, David, started avoiding me, retreating to his room whenever I tried to speak with him. My younger children seemed confused and frightened, unsure why their once happy family felt so divided. One evening, as I walked through the marketplace, I overheard two men whispering nearby. "Did you hear? Rabbi Eliyahu has lost his way. They say he's questioning the Torah." Imagine that, a rabbi! Their words stung, not because they doubted me, but because they didn't understand the truth I had found. The pressure mounted when Rivka's father, a prominent elder in another synagogue, came to visit. He sat across from me in the living room, his expression grave. "Eliyahu, I hear troubling things," he began. "You've always been a man of integrity, but now people are questioning your faith. Do you realize what this could do to your family's reputation?" "I understand," I said cautiously, "but I'm not abandoning my faith. I'm fulfilling it. His face darkened. Fulfilling it? By questioning the law? By speaking of other interpretations? This is dangerous talk. The conversation ended in tension, with him warning Rivka to keep an eye on me. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Amidst the chaos, a single glimmer of hope emerged. Jonathan, my friend who had shared his testimony with me, introduced me to a small group of Jewish believers in Yeshua. They met in secret, away from the prying eyes of the community. At first, I was hesitant to join them. It felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever known. But as I sat among them, hearing their stories of transformation and grace, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in weeks. One man shared how he had lost his position as a scribe after embracing Yeshua, but had found peace in knowing the Messiah personally. Another woman spoke of being cast out by her family but holding firm in her faith. Their courage inspired me. They had faced rejection and loss, yet their joy was undeniable. I realized I wasn't alone in this journey. As I left the meeting, Jonathan walked with me. Eliyahu, he said, the path is narrow and difficult, but it leads to life. Don't lose heart. His words stayed with me, a beacon of hope in the midst of my struggles. But as I returned home that night, the shadows of doubt and fear lingered. How much more would I lose before I could truly follow the Messiah? The cracks in my life widened with each passing day. My wife Rivka seemed to shift between sorrow and anger, as if unsure whether to mourn or fight. Our conversations had become strained, and the warmth we once shared was now a distant memory. One evening, as the children were asleep, she confronted me in the kitchen. Eliyahu, she began, her voice shaking, do you understand what you're doing to us? The children hear the whispers. David comes home from school and the other boys mock him. This isn't just about you. You're ruining our family. I placed my hand on the counter, steadying myself. Rivka, I love you. I love our family. But this isn't something I chose. It's the truth I've found. How can I ignore it? How can you ignore us? She snapped. You're supposed to lead this family, not tear it apart. Her words were like a dagger to my heart, but I couldn't deny what she was feeling. My transformation wasn't just my journey. It was affecting everyone around me. My eldest son, David, grew more distant by the day. Once my eager student, he now avoided me altogether. One evening, I found him in his room, staring at the wall. David, I said gently, can we talk? He didn't turn around. Why? So you can tell me more about how you've betrayed everything you taught me? David, I haven't betrayed anything. I've found the fulfillment of it all. He turned then, his eyes filled with tears and anger. The kids at school call you a heretic. They say our family is cursed. You've ruined my life, Abba. I tried to reach for him, but he pulled away, slamming the door in my face. The rejection extended beyond my family. My students stopped attending my Torah studies. Friends crossed the street to avoid speaking with me. Even shopkeepers, once friendly and talkative, now handed me goods in silence, their faces averted. One night, as I walked home from a secret gathering of believers, a group of men cornered me in an alley. Rabbi Eliyahu, one sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Or should we call you something else now? I don't want trouble, I said calmly, though my heart raced. But trouble wants you, another said, stepping closer. We won't let you corrupt this community. Before I could respond, a fist connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. They didn't linger, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I staggered home, clutching my side, and found Rivka waiting by the door. What happened? She gasped, rushing to help me. Just some men, making their feelings known, I said through gritted teeth. She helped me to a chair, but her hands trembled as she tended to my bruises. Is this what your truth brings us? She whispered, her voice breaking. Pain and humiliation? I wanted to tell her it would get better, that it was worth it, but I couldn't lie. The path I was on was difficult, and I had no guarantee of how it would end. Amid the turmoil, I clung to moments of grace. The secret gatherings with other believers became my refuge. It was there I met Rachel, a widow whose faith in Yeshua had cost her everything. She had been cast out by her family, but spoke with a peace that I envied. How do you endure it? I asked her one evening after the meeting. She smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet strength. I endure because he endured for me. This life is temporary, but his kingdom is eternal. Her words stayed with me, a beacon in my storm. Yet even as I drew strength from these meetings, I couldn't shake the weight of my family's pain. One night, as I prayed alone in the living room, I felt a presence. It wasn't visible, but it was tangible, filling the room with warmth and light. A voice, gentle yet firm, seemed to speak directly to my heart. "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Tears streamed down my face. It was as if Yeshua himself was confirming my path. But even in that moment of clarity, I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. When Rivka came downstairs and saw me kneeling, she paused in the doorway. For the first time in weeks, her expression softened, though it was still tinged with pain. "Eliyahu," she said quietly, "I don't understand what's happening to you, but I can't keep fighting like this. If you want to ruin yourself, I can't stop you. But please, don't take us down with you." Her words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the cost of following the truth. The tension between me and Rivka grew unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the inner storm that churned inside me. I had reached a point where the truth was so deep within my soul, yet the world around me seemed to be closing in. Each day felt like a battle, and every night I lay awake, wondering if I had made the right choice. It was a spiritual struggle, but it had begun to tear apart the very fabric of my life. One afternoon, after an intense meeting with a fellow believer, I found myself walking through the crowded marketplace, lost in thought. I hadn't realized how far I had wandered until I found myself standing in front of the old synagogue where I had once been so sure of my place. It loomed before me like a monument to my past life, its walls a reminder of who I had been and who I was no longer. I turned to walk away, but something inside me stopped. I felt a strong urge to enter, not out of nostalgia, but to confront the ghosts of my former beliefs. I opened the door, and as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and incense filled my senses. The echoes of prayers I had once uttered in devotion now seemed hollow, as though they belonged to someone else. As I sat down on one of the benches, the weight of everything I had left behind settled heavily on my heart. I prayed quietly, asking for clarity and peace, but there was no response. The silence felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. Then, unexpectedly, a strange feeling washed over me, a warmth that seemed to start in the pit of my stomach and spread outward. It wasn't a physical heat, but a deep inner peace that I had not felt in so long. It was as if something was surrounding me, filling every corner of my heart. I could almost hear a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You are not alone. Keep going. The way is narrow, but it leads to life." I opened my eyes and looked around the empty synagogue, wondering if the words had come from my own mind or if they had been spoken by something or someone greater than myself. But when I looked to the back of the room, I saw a figure standing near the altar. My heart raced, and I stood up, but as I took a step forward, the figure was gone. The warmth lingered, but the presence had disappeared. I stood there, shaking, unsure of what had just occurred. Was this a sign, a vision, or just the product of my overactive mind? I left the synagogue feeling unsettled but strangely empowered. It was as though I had been touched by something beyond comprehension, something that reaffirmed my path. But doubt still gnawed at me. Was I being led to a deeper truth, or had I become so entrenched in my beliefs that I had lost sight of everything else? As I made my way home, I found Rivka sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn and tired. She didn't look up when I entered, and I knew she was waiting for the same question I had been asking myself for days. What now? I sat down across from her, unsure of how to begin. "Rivka," I said softly, "I don't know where this path leads, but I know it's the right one. I felt something today, something powerful. It was as if I was in the presence of God, and I couldn't deny it." Her eyes flickered with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You felt it?" she whispered. "I don't know what it was," I admitted, "but it was real." Rivka didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, her eyes on me, as though searching for something she had lost and was hoping to find again. I could see the weight of her inner conflict. She loved me, but she couldn't understand how I had strayed so far. "What if this is just the beginning?" I said, more to myself than to her. "What if the truth I'm seeking is leading me to something more than I can comprehend? What if this is where I was always meant to be?" Her face softened, and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know, Eliyahu. I don't know anymore. But you're changing, and I'm afraid you'll leave me behind." The words broke me. I didn't want to leave her behind, but I could no longer ignore the call I felt so deeply within. "I'm not leaving you," I said, reaching for her hand. "But I can't ignore what I've seen. I can't unknow what I've learned. I don't want to lose you, but I need you to understand. This is my journey, and I need you to walk it with me." Her eyes welled up, and she pulled her hand back. "I don't know how to walk that path, Eliyahu." As the night grew darker, I realized that the road I was on would be filled with difficult choices. The tension between my past and my future had never been clearer. I didn't know if Rivka and I could remain together, or if my faith would continue to draw me away from everything I had once known. But one thing was certain: the path ahead was uncertain, and I could no longer walk it alone. As the weeks passed, I found myself isolated, but not in the way I had expected. I thought the loneliness would be the hardest part, but instead, it was the fracture of the relationships I had spent my life building. The bonds with my family, my friends, and my community had always been my foundation. But now each conversation, each moment, was filled with an undercurrent of tension, as if no one truly knew how to speak to me anymore. Rivka had grown quieter, as though the space between us had expanded into something too vast to bridge. She still made our meals, still cared for the children, but the warmth in her eyes had faded. I could sense her fear of losing me, yet also her frustration, as if she were watching me drift away to somewhere she couldn't follow. David had begun to speak to me more, but it was always with bitterness, as though every word was laced with the pain of betrayal. "Why can't you just let it go, Abba?" he would ask, his voice hard. We were fine before all of this. We were a family. I wanted to explain to help him understand, but how could I? How could I explain a transformation so profound, so rooted in a spiritual experience that defied everything he had been taught to believe? One evening, I overheard him speaking to his younger brother, Isaac. "Dad's gone crazy, Isaac. He's not the same anymore." My heart sank. It was the first time I realized that David's perception of me had shifted so drastically. He didn't just disagree with my beliefs. He had started to see me as a stranger. The only one who seemed unaffected by my transformation was my youngest daughter, Miriam. She was still young enough to accept me without question. I found myself holding her close more often, seeking solace in her innocent love. But even she began to ask questions. "Papa, why don't you go to the synagogue anymore?" she asked one night, her eyes wide with curiosity. How could I answer her? How could I explain to my little girl that everything had changed and that I had found a new purpose, one that didn't fit within the walls of the life we had built? But it wasn't just my immediate family that seemed torn by my spiritual journey. The small group of believers I had begun meeting with had grown slowly, cautiously, as others from the community had started to join. They too were in the midst of their own struggles. Some had been forced to leave their families behind, just as I had. Others had faced rejection from their synagogues, cast out for their beliefs. There was a quiet unity in our suffering, as though we were all walking a narrow road together. I began to see a familiar face at every meeting. Jacob, a former neighbor and childhood friend. He had always been a pillar of the community, a man whose opinions everyone respected. But now, he too had begun to question his faith in ways that terrified him. "You're not the only one struggling, Eliyahu," he confessed one evening as we sat alone after a gathering. "I've been to the temple every day of my life, prayed, studied, but there's something missing. I can't explain it." His voice shook. "What you found, it's different. But I wonder, is it real, or have you been deceived?" I saw the conflict in his eyes, the same conflict that churned inside me. He wanted to believe, but fear held him back. Fear of losing everything, fear of being ostracized. I felt a kinship with Jacob, as if he had stepped into the same turmoil that I had faced. His struggle mirrored my own, and I found myself drawn to him. Over time, my growing sense of conviction began to affect the community in ways I had not anticipated. While some still mocked me, others, like Jacob, began to question their own beliefs. It was a slow, hesitant process, but the ripple effect was undeniable. More and more people came to the meetings, each one carrying their own burdens and doubts. It was clear that the message of Yeshua was resonating with those who were ready to hear it. But as this small fellowship grew, so did the opposition. The leaders of the synagogue began to notice the changes, and whispers of my heresy spread faster than I could keep up. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor, an elder from the synagogue, Aaron, who had once been a close friend. "Eliyahu," he said, his tone cold, "you've crossed a line. We've all heard the rumors, and I can't stand by while you lead people away from the faith." "Aaron, I haven't led anyone anywhere. I've only shared what I've experienced," I said, trying to remain calm. He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "This is not the truth. I've known you since you were a child. You've changed, Eliyahu. You're not the man I once called my brother." His words stung, and yet I couldn't find it in me to argue. I wasn't the man I had been. How could I be? Everything had changed. As Aaron turned to leave, he paused. "I pray for you, my friend, but if you continue down this path, you will lose everything. Remember that." His words haunted me, but I knew something deeper was guiding me. Despite the growing isolation, I felt a strange sense of peace. In the midst of these losses, I was discovering something more powerful than any worldly bond, an inner truth that was worth fighting for. The days that followed Aaron's visit felt like a whirlwind. It was as if the very foundation of my life was crumbling beneath me, piece by piece. With each passing moment, I found myself torn between two worlds, my past and the faith I had come to embrace. The more I tried to hold on to the threads of my old life, the more I felt them slipping away. My family, my friends, and my community were all drifting further from me, and the uncertainty of the future loomed like a dark cloud. It wasn't just the external conflicts that wore on me, it was the internal battle that was far more intense. I had once believed in certainty, in the comfort of tradition, in the safety of following the rules. Now I was standing at the edge of something I could barely comprehend. The path I was on was narrow, and the more I walked it, the more isolated I felt. I had begun to question everything I had known, and the fear of what I might lose paralyzed me at times. Would I lose Rivka, my children, my place in the world? But it was the event that occurred one evening that truly changed everything. It was the kind of moment where the world seems to stop, and the future is determined in a single breath. It happened after dinner, a quiet night in our home. Rivka had been distant all evening, her face drawn in worry. The children had gone to bed early, and we were left alone in the dimly lit living room. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. And for the first time, I realized that the distance between us was no longer just physical. It was spiritual, emotional, a chasm too wide to bridge with words alone. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Eliyahu," Rivka said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and frustration. "I see the way you're changing, and I don't know who you are anymore. You're slipping away from me, from us. I don't recognize you, and I'm scared." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me, her pain evident. I had heard the same words from her for weeks, but this time they hit me differently. It wasn't just her fear that echoed in her voice. It was the silent plea for me to return to the man I once was. For a moment, I was overwhelmed with guilt. How could I continue down this path knowing it was tearing her apart? How could I follow this truth if it meant losing my family? But as I opened my mouth to speak, the doorbell rang, breaking the fragile silence. Rivka looked at me, confused and exhausted, but I knew I had to answer it. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation, another argument with someone who didn't understand. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a stranger who stood there. It was my father. "Son," he said quietly, his voice full of pain and concern, "we need to talk." The moment I saw his face, I knew that this conversation would change everything. My father, the man who had shaped so much of my early life, was standing on my doorstep, his eyes filled with disappointment and fear. He hadn't been to my home in months, not since my transformation had become undeniable, and now he was here, demanding answers. "I've heard what you've been doing," he said, stepping inside. "I've heard you've abandoned our faith, your family's traditions. What's happening to you? Are you willing to throw away everything we've built? All the sacrifices your mother and I made, all the years we spent in devotion, and now you just walk away? For what? Some new belief? A new path that leads you away from everything we stand for? I could feel my heart beating in my chest, my mind racing. Every word he said felt like a blow, but I couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything I had learned. Still, the pain in his eyes, the sorrow in his voice, cut me deeper than I had anticipated. Father, I haven't abandoned anything, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I haven't turned my back on our faith. I've found something deeper, something real, something I can no longer ignore. I've seen the truth, and it's not what we were taught. This is about life, about a new way to live, and I can't turn my back on it. I can't unknow what I've discovered. I paused, taking a deep breath, knowing the words I was about to speak would tear everything apart. This isn't just a belief, it's the reality of who I am now, and I can't pretend I'm someone else anymore. My father's face twisted in disbelief, and for a moment I saw the weight of years of tradition and expectation crash down on him. You're being deceived, he said, his voice shaking. This isn't the way, Eliyahu. You've lost your way, and if you continue down this path, you'll be cut off from this family, from our community. I had expected the ultimatum, but the sting of it still hit me like a physical blow. A choice was before me, a choice that would define my future. Do I continue down this path, knowing the cost, knowing it would cost me everything I had ever known? Or do I return to the comfort of the old ways, bearing my newfound truth to preserve the life I had built? I stood there, silent, the weight of the moment hanging heavily between us. I glanced at Rivka, who was watching us both from the doorway, her face a mixture of sadness and hope. I could feel the deep divide between us, the rupture that had occurred in my family, and it was clear that the decision I made now would determine the future of us all. I didn't know what to say. The choice I was facing was the hardest one I had ever encountered. Would I continue to follow this truth that had transformed me, or would I choose my family, my old life, and abandon the path that had awakened my soul? The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a boulder, each moment stretching into eternity. I had always prided myself on being decisive, on making the right choices for my family and myself. But this felt different. This choice wasn't about practicalities or the next step in life. It was a choice about my very soul. I had always thought faith was simple, a set of beliefs, a framework within which you live. But now, faith was something far more dynamic, more personal, and it demanded everything from me. As I stood in the living room, staring at my father, a man I had once looked to for guidance, I knew that everything was on the line. His disappointment, his anger, it was all so real. He wasn't just rejecting my beliefs, he was rejecting the person I had become. In his eyes, I was no longer his son. I had crossed a line that was unforgivable. Eliyahu, I've prayed for you, he said, his voice soft but firm, but I cannot follow you down this path. I cannot support you, not like this. I looked at him, my heart breaking in two. It wasn't just a difference in beliefs, it was as if the very essence of our relationship had been shattered. For a moment, I wanted to run back to him, to apologize, to tell him that this had all been a mistake. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't. I had seen the truth, and no matter how much I wished it weren't so, I couldn't unsee it. I'm sorry, Father, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you, but I've found something that I can't turn away from. I've found a truth that is bigger than all of us. I can't go back. The words hung in the air between us, like a painful admission that both of us knew couldn't be taken back. My father's face darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something I had never expected from him. Betrayal. You are choosing a lie, Eliyahu. You're choosing destruction, and I won't stand by and watch you lead others astray. Those words hit me harder than anything he had said before. I had expected resistance. I had prepared myself for his anger. But this, the accusation that I was leading people astray, cut deeper than I could have anticipated. The weight of it crushed me. I'm not leading anyone astray, Father, I replied, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. I'm simply sharing the truth I've found. I've seen the light. I've felt his presence in a way I can't explain. It's real, and it's changed me. It's not something I can just ignore because it's inconvenient. I could see his resolve harden. The man who had raised me, the man I had always looked up to, was now standing in front of me as a stranger. The gap between us had never been wider. Just as my father turned to leave, Rivka stepped into the room. She hadn't said much during the confrontation, but I could see the emotions swirling on her face. Her eyes were filled with the same sorrow I had seen for weeks. "Eliyahu, please," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You have to understand. You're tearing us apart. I'm afraid that if you keep going down this road, you'll lose everything you've ever loved. I can't lose you, Eliyahu. I can't." Her words were a plea, a desperate cry for me to choose her, to choose the life we had built together over the uncertainty of this new path. And in that moment, I saw the painful truth of it all. The cost of my faith wasn't just spiritual, it was personal. It meant the possibility of losing my family, of walking away from everything I had known. I looked between Rivka and my father, their faces full of love, pain, and fear. I saw my children in my mind's eye, David, Isaac, Miriam, and I knew that the decision I made would shape their future. But the truth that had transformed me, that had awakened my soul, was too powerful to ignore. I could not deny what I had felt, what I had seen in the moments when I was closest to God. I couldn't deny the overwhelming peace that had entered my life, the joy that came with truly knowing Him. "I'm sorry, Rivka," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I can't turn back. I know it hurts, but this is who I am now. I'm following the truth, no matter the cost." Her face crumpled, and I saw the tears spill from her eyes. She reached out to me, but I could see the weight of her heartache in the way her hands trembled. She didn't understand, not fully. But she knew I was choosing something greater than us, something that I couldn't explain in simple terms. I had to choose God. As my father left the house, I felt a sense of finality settle in my chest. This was it, the breaking point. There was no going back now. I was standing at a precipice, and I had to make the hardest decision of my life. The path I had chosen wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my faith, my family, and my future. And with one last, painful glance at Rivka, I knew that whatever came next, I had made my choice. In the weeks that followed, the emotional toll of my decision weighed heavier than I ever anticipated. The once familiar rhythm of my life had shattered, and I found myself standing in the wreckage, unsure of how to rebuild. Each day was a battle against doubt and loneliness, as the relationships that had once defined me slowly slipped away. My father had not spoken to me since that night. Rivka and I barely exchanged words, the silence between us stretching longer than the words we could never find to express the distance that had formed between us. But amidst the overwhelming grief, there was also a strange sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing that I had done the right thing, even if it cost me everything I had ever known. It wasn't an easy peace, but it was real. It was a quiet certainty that the path I had chosen was the path that had been set before me. I had become more and more immersed in prayer and reflection. Every day I sought deeper understanding of the truth that had been revealed to me. It wasn't just about belief anymore. It was about becoming the person God had called me to be. But even as I sought this truth, there was still the gnawing fear in the back of my mind. The fear of what I had lost. The fear of what more I would have to sacrifice. One morning, I woke to find a letter sitting on the kitchen table. Rivka had written it. I hadn't seen her face in days, but the sight of her handwriting brought a rush of emotions that I couldn't ignore. I sat down at the table and slowly opened the letter, my hands trembling. "Eliyahu, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I need to tell you something important. I've been praying for you, for us, for our family. The journey you're on is so different from the one I imagined we would take together, and I can't pretend I understand it all. But what I do know is that I still love you. I don't know what God has planned for us, but I am willing to trust Him, if you will walk this road with me. I may not fully understand your faith yet, but I want to. I want to believe in what you believe in. I want to walk with you, even if it means that we have to find a new way together. We may be on different paths right now, but I'm asking you to not give up on me, on us. Love, Rivka." The words pierced my heart, filling me with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, a glimmer of light broke through the darkness. Rivka was reaching out. She was offering me a chance to rebuild, not just our relationship, but our lives together. It wasn't a full reconciliation. There were still so many questions, so much hurt between us, but it was a beginning. A small step, but a step nonetheless. And then there was another letter, this one from my father. Eliyahu, I don't understand everything you've chosen. I don't know how this will end, but I want you to know that I am still your father. I have been praying for you, even when I didn't know how. The things you've said have shaken me, and I still don't agree with you, but my love for you hasn't changed. I can't walk this journey with you, not in the way you want, but I will walk beside you at a distance if you'll allow me to. I'll pray for you, and I'll support you in any way I can. Please don't think you've lost me. Your father. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read my father's words. This wasn't the angry dismissal I had feared. This was a tentative offering, a hope that perhaps one day we could reconcile. My heart ached with gratitude and sorrow, knowing how much he had been hurt by my decisions, but also feeling the weight of his love and his desire to keep a thread of connection alive. These letters, both so different yet so alike, changed everything for me. They represented the two things I had longed for: reconciliation and acceptance. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. The road ahead would still be filled with uncertainty, with moments of doubt and the fear of losing everything again. But the peace I had found was growing. The truth I had embraced, God's truth, had not just saved me, it was healing the broken parts of my life, piece by piece. In the days that followed, I spent hours in prayer, asking God for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to move forward in this new chapter of my life. And then something unexpected happened. I received a call from a man I hadn't spoken to in years, Aaron, the one who had first shown me the path toward this new faith. He had heard about the struggles I was facing, and he wanted to meet with me. When we met, it was as if the last puzzle piece fell into place. He spoke of the deeper truths I had yet to fully comprehend. He shared stories of others who had walked this road of transformation, and how God had used their journeys to bring about healing, not just for them, but for those around them. His words were like balm for my weary soul. It became clear to me then, this wasn't the end of my journey. It was the beginning of something greater, a new beginning that would take me beyond what I had ever imagined. And while the road ahead was uncertain, the one thing I knew for sure was that I was no longer alone. God was with me, and now, with Rivka's renewed hope and my father's tentative acceptance, I could see a path forward, one that, despite the cost, was worth walking. As I stand here today, reflecting on the journey that has brought me to this point, I am filled with a deep sense of gratitude and awe. My story is not one of perfect faith or a seamless transformation. It is one marked by struggle, heartache, and sacrifice. But it is also a story of redemption, of finding a truth that has changed me in ways I never thought possible. I used to believe that the world was simple, that life was about following a set of rules, checking boxes, and adhering to traditions. But that was before the near-death experience that rocked my very understanding of reality, before I encountered the truth of God's presence in a way I couldn't deny, before I realized that faith isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about a relationship with the Creator, about trusting Him even when the road is uncertain, even when it costs us everything. The path I chose was never easy. There were moments when I doubted everything, moments when I wanted to turn back, to return to the familiar life I once knew. There were relationships that crumbled, family members who couldn't understand, and times when I felt completely alone. But I found something deeper than all that. I found a peace that transcends circumstances, a joy that isn't based on what's happening around me, but on the unshakable truth of God's love. I'm still learning, still growing in this faith. I don't have all the answers, and there are days when I wonder if I made the right choice. But I know this for certain. The truth I found in my NDE, the truth that has transformed my life, is real. God's love is real. And that love is what has carried me through the darkest moments and is guiding me into a future full of hope. Today I stand in a place of reconciliation, though it's a work in progress. My relationship with Rivka is healing, and though we are not yet where we once were, there is hope. My father and I are still on different paths, but his love for me has not wavered. I've come to understand that sometimes reconciliation doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's a slow, painful process of learning to love each other where we are and trusting that God will do the rest. As I look ahead, I see a future that is full of both challenges and opportunities. There will be more obstacles to overcome, more moments of doubt and fear, but I also see the possibility of a deeper relationship with God, a closer bond with my family, and a hope that nothing in this world can take away. And now, I want to encourage you, the viewer, to reflect on your own journey. You may not have experienced a near-death experience like mine, but we all have moments when we question our beliefs, when we face challenges that seem insurmountable. You may be at a crossroads in your own life, unsure of where to turn. I want you to know that you are not alone. No matter what you are facing, God's love is available to you, just as it was to me. You can find peace, healing, and purpose in Him. If you're inspired by my story, I encourage you to take a step of faith today. Whether it's reaching out to someone you've hurt, seeking a deeper relationship with God, or simply taking a moment to pray and reflect, know that your journey is just beginning. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of transformation and redemption, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with others who may need to hear this message of hope. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I pray that, like me, you will find the courage to face whatever challenges come your way, knowing that God is with you every step of the way.